Serial killers have a hold on the human imagination, yet for all of that public interest, there are lingering mysteries, from the identities and numbers of victims to, in some cases, the identities of the killers themselves. Though he certainly wasn't the first known serial killer in history, Jack the Ripper is one of the most notorious. He holds our fascination more than a century after the deaths of 5 canonical victims in 1888 London: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The reason why we say canonical is that there is speculation that there were earlier and later crimes committed by the Ripper, even as late as 1892. Yet we still don't know who he was, despite well over a century of media attention.
If he attacks prostitutes, he's attacking women who automatically go off to dark corners with half a dozen strange men every day. How on earth are you going to find which one is doing the killing?
Speculation has run so rampant that more casual onlookers might be forgiven for thinking that everyone in 1888 London was a suspect, from a local midwife to Queen Victoria, or at least her wayward grandson Eddie. More recently, genetic analysis of samples from a shawl found with Eddowes pointed to a barber named Aaron Kosminski. Yet not everyone is convinced, saying the mitochondrial DNA retrieved is only good for excluding people, not identifying a long-dead killer. Others say it's hard to confirm that the shawl was really at the crime scene or that it wasn't contaminated.
More than 300 people were placed under investigation, and 80 of them were brought in for questioning.
The other problem is that in 19th century London, Kosminski was also used as a John Doe type of last name for any Eastern European Jew in the area. In other words, Aaron Kosminski may not be the person's real name. More recent evidence is just as questionable, including a cane owned by Detective Frederick Aberline that supposedly features an image of the killer created from eyewitness accounts. But that's hardly a smoking gun, and as far as many are concerned, we're no closer to definitively identifying Jack the Ripper than they were in the 19th century. In fact, we might be even further away as more unlikely suspects get added to the pool. Though Ted Bundy confessed to killing 30 women right before his 1989 execution, the exact number of his victims remains in doubt. There are some investigators that believe the actual number is over 100, pointing to the oddly efficient brutality of his crimes as evidence that he may have started earlier than many once thought.
I thought that he was going to kiss me. Instead, he said very quietly, "Do you know what? I'm going to kill you."
It's likely that there are still unrecovered remains of Bundy's victims out there. In March 2024, Utah private investigator Jason Jensen told Cowboy State Daily that he intended to search for 4 of those women during the summer of 2024, assisted by his human remains detection dog. Jensen is focusing on 4 missing women: Deborah Kent, Nancy Wilcox, Susan Curtis, and Julie Cunningham, because Bundy directly confessed to their murders shortly before his death. Kent's kneecap, confirmed to be hers via genetic testing, was recovered in the remote area of Utah where Jensen plans to search first, and Cunningham is reportedly buried in western Colorado. And if the speculation is right, they may uncover some unknown victims in the same vicinity. Between 1968 and 1985, a serial killer dubbed the Monster of Florence took the lives of at least 16 victims. Some investigators believe the monster was actually a group of serial killers, and by group, we mean an actual group. Whoever it was had a fairly consistent modus operandi, killing 8 couples in the hills outside of town while reserving particular brutality for female victims. In 1994, Pietro Pacciani was convicted of 14 of the murders. Then his conviction was overturned. He was set for a new trial but died in 1998 before proceedings could begin. Shortly before Pacciani's death, 2 of his associates were also convicted of participating in the murders. There's no doubt that some aspects of Pacciani's case didn't make sense, like the fact that an illiterate laborer had managed to buy 2 houses and had a lot more money in the bank than he had any business having, at least legitimate business. And was one of Pacciani's convicted associates, Giancarlo Lanti, telling the truth when he said that a doctor had directed them to kill? Or was he spinning a wild tale to shift some of the blame off his shoulders? Some detectives then spun their own story of a shadowy occult group made up of high-ranking citizens of Florence, or maybe a top-secret Italian government agency, although little came of those suspicions over the years. There's even a suspect that has ties to the Zodiac killer all the way back in the States. You knew we'd get to Zodiac. Keep watching and we'll break that down in a bit. Dennis Rader spent nearly 20 years terrorizing the area of Wichita, Kansas, killing 10 people between 1974 and 1991. In 2004, after a lawyer got some publicity about a book he was writing on the long-forgotten crimes, BTK returned. After some back and forth with media and police, Rader's own sloppiness and lack of computer knowledge did him in. He sent an easily traceable floppy disk to authorities and was arrested shortly after, all because he was desperate to tell his own story.
BTK began today's letter with a question. How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?
The raider pleaded guilty to 10 counts of murder at his 2005 trial. From the moment of his capture, there has been thought that this isn't a full accounting of his crimes. Law enforcement claims that there's credible evidence connecting him to other missing persons and potential murders. Specifically, there's one in Oklahoma that is the focus of investigators, the 1976 disappearance of Cynthia Kinney. Investigators can put Rader in the area around the same time as her disappearance, and she generally fits Rader's type and matches some creepy things he said about abducting someone from a laundromat, which is exactly what happened to Kinney. Investigators were assisted by Rader's daughter, Carrie Rawson, who interviewed her father in prison and used her own memories to pinpoint key details and sites that warrant further investigation.
1 minute, you had a loving father. The next minute, he's a serial killer.
A 2023 search conducted by an Oklahoma sheriff's office of Rader's former Kansas property uncovered unspecified items of interest, according to a press release issued by the office. In the early 1970s, a shocking number of young men went missing in and around Houston, Texas. It only stopped in August 1973 when a man named Dean Corll was shot to death in his home by 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley. A search of Corll's home and property found the remains of 27 missing boys and men, some as young as 13. Henley, along with 18-year-old David Brooks, had been Corll's accomplices, helping to kidnap, torture, and kill the older man's victims. Brooks was out of the picture by summer 1973, leaving only Henley to find the victims. One night, Corll, later known as the Candyman Killer, became enraged when Henley brought a girl along with an intended male victim. After threatening to kill Henley along with his friends, Henley executed Corll when he wasn't looking. Nearly all the victims have been identified, with the exception of one 15 to 18-year-old boy who died around 1972 and is currently referred to as John Houston Doe. In 1983, a 28th victim was discovered and later identified in 2009. When interviewed, Henley maintained that there were perhaps 20 or more victims still out there, but searches have turned up little evidence to date. Many decades later, families are left wondering if their missing loved ones may have been a victim of Corll. In popular imagination, serial killers are often depicted as singular figures committing heinous acts in isolation, but that may not always be the case. Dean Corll had accomplices. That's long been the speculation about John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer who murdered an estimated 33 boys and young men around suburban Chicago in the 1970s.
One time he looked at me and he said, well, you know, clowns can get away with murder.
After Gacy was arrested in the late 1970s, police found that his home in Norwood Park, Illinois, contained the remains of 29 victims, with at least 4 more found in the nearby Des Plaines River. But here's the thing. The timelines of when some victims went missing and when Gacy was in town don't always line up, leading to the theory that Gacy must have had at least one accomplice who was never apprehended. Gacy has said as much himself, yet serial killers aren't known to be reliable, especially when they're attempting to avoid the death penalty. However, if that was Gacy's motivation, the tactic didn't work, as he was executed in 1994. Not everyone is convinced of the accomplice theory. Retired Des Plaines police officer Michael Albrecht, who witnessed Gacy's confession, told Esquire that he believed Gacy was a meticulous killer who worked alone.
He wanted to be in charge. It was John Gacy. He wanted to be in control, and he wanted to do it his way.
Jeffrey Rignall, who survived the Gacy attack, stated that there was another person present during his abuse. Gacy did have roommates, but there's no solid proof that Gacy had any assistance in his crimes. The Zodiac killer was active around San Francisco in the late 1960s. There were 5 confirmed victims spread across 4 separate attacks. The most common image of Zodiac is him in that black executioner's hood with that crazy symbol on his chest, but there are other non-hooded sketches from eyewitnesses. Zodiac liked to talk about his crimes. He made a phone call to the Vallejo Police Department and wrote letters in cipher and sent them to local papers. Despite all that communication and a pretty solid sketch, no one has definitively identified the Zodiac killer. Even when cryptographers cracked the cipher in 2020, the contents revealed little about the killer's identity.
6'2", 200 pounds, stocky build, ghost.
Probably the best-known subject was Arthur Lee Allen, as featured in the 2007 David Fincher film Zodiac. Look, it was a good movie, but Allen was eliminated as a suspect via DNA evidence, but he still remains a person of interest to researchers. More notorious figures, including the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, cult leader Charles Manson, and yes, the aforementioned Monster of Florence, have all been mentioned along the way Zodiac. It's not even clear how many people were harmed by the Zodiac killer. Earlier and later deaths have been linked to Zodiac based on similar patterns in geographic proximity, such as the shooting deaths of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards in 1963 near Santa Barbara. The 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates has long been linked to Zodiac, with Zodiac himself alluding to her in later letters. Despite DNA evidence from the crime and other confirmed Zodiac cases, authorities are no closer today to finding out who he was than they were 50 years ago. From February 1968 until Halloween 1969, 3 women, Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puddock, were killed in Glasgow, Scotland.
These were working-class people living in difficult circumstances, out for one night of fun.
All had visited the Barrel Inn Ballroom the nights of their deaths, were killed in a similar manner, left near their homes, and had been menstruating at the time they died. Puddock's sister Jean was with her the night of her murder, and the two shared a taxi with an unidentified man leaving the Barrel Inn. Jean was dropped off, and Helen continued on with the man. Jean told police he called himself John and quoted from the Bible, giving a physical description. Though she quite possibly shared a cab with the killer, little came of Jean's testimony. One theory claims that the police actually knew who Bible John was all along, but covered it up because he was related to police detective Jimmy McInnes. That suspect, John McInnes, took his own life in 1980. His remains were exhumed in the 1990s for DNA testing, but he wasn't a match for samples found on Helen Puddock's tights. Another theory posits that serial killer Peter Tobin was the culprit. He murdered people as late as 2006 and died in 2022 while serving 3 life sentences. Yet the lack of evidence for the Tobin theory or any others means Bible John's identity remains a mystery. It's hard to find a story with more unanswered questions than that of the Bloody Bender family. Though there's little question they really operated in the hinterlands of 1870s Kansas, preying on travelers on the nearby Osage Trail, little else is known about them. The group consisted of Pa and Ma Bender, an unfriendly pair who spoke little English. Their children were the adult John, who was reported to be a friendly, if odd man who giggled at strange times, and Kate. Not long after they set up their homestead near Cherryville, Kansas, travelers began to go missing. Interest didn't really circle around the Benders until the disappearance of William York, whose politically ambitious brother Alexander put together a search party. After the party questioned the Benders, the family, if they ever were a family in the first place, skipped town. A search of the property found a small graveyard of sorts that contained William's body, as well as those of 10 other people. Here's how little we actually know about the Benders. Their name probably wasn't really Bender. No one is sure if they were German, Norwegian, or Dutch. And the kids, John and Kate, might have actually been husband and wife. It's no wonder they seemed to just disappear after 1873, but where did the Benders go? Various accounts say that they were apprehended and killed by local vigilantes, split up or boarded a train to Texas and traveled further into Indian territory. In the late 19th century accounts, 2 women were arrested and accused of being Ma and Kate. The case was dropped for lack of evidence.